The Kethmore Armada had conquered 17 star systems in the past solar cycle. Their massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, cast shadows across entire planets as they descended to claim new territories. The galaxy trembled at the mere mention of their name. Admiral Zexkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Decimator, watching another world burn below. His forearms crossed behind his chitinous back as his compound eyes reflected the orange glow of the dying civilization beneath them. The Kethmore had evolved from predatory insects on a harsh desert world, and their empire reflected their nature, brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. "Another pathetic resistance crushed," hissed his second-in-command, Commander Theknal, her mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The humans of this sector offered no more challenge than the others. Zexkar's head tilted slightly. The humans were indeed puzzling. Most species either surrendered immediately upon seeing the Kethmore fleet or fought with desperate fury until they were extinct. But humans seemed different. They fought smart, used guerrilla tactics, and never seemed to truly give up even when defeat was certain. "Sir," called the communications officer from across the bridge, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It appears to be from a human." "A surrender?" Theknal asked hopefully. "No, sir. It's a challenge." Zexkar's four eyes focused on the main screen as a grainy image appeared. A single human male, dressed in strange dark clothing, sat in what appeared to be the ruins of a military facility. His face was painted in dark patterns, and his eyes held something Zexkar had rarely seen when looking at prey: absolute fearlessness. "My name is Master Chief Marcus Reed. United States Navy SEALs," the human said calmly. "I know you can hear me, Bugface. Your little invasion party just made a big mistake." The entire bridge fell silent. Even the normally chattering communications array seemed to pause. No one had ever addressed Admiral Zexkar with such casual disrespect and lived. "You killed my team," Reed continued, his voice steady, but carrying an undertone that made even the battle-hardened Kethmore warriors shift uncomfortably. "You destroyed my ship. You think you're the apex predators of this galaxy." He leaned forward slightly. "You're about to learn what a real predator looks like." Theknal's mandibles clacked angrily. "Sir, shall I order an orbital bombardment of his position?" Zexkar raised one clawed hand for silence. Something about this human intrigued him. In all his campaigns, he had seen fear, anger, desperation, and hopelessness in the eyes of his enemies, but this human showed none of those things. Instead, there was calculation, determination, and something else. Something that reminded Zexkar of the look he saw in his own reflection. "Human," Zexkar spoke into the communications array, his voice a deep rumble that could crack stone. "You are 1 against 10,000. Your planet burns around you. What do you hope to accomplish with your words?" Reed smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than any war cry they had ever heard. "I'm not trying to accomplish anything with words, Admiral. Words are just to make sure you're paying attention, because in about 6 hours your entire fleet is going to start disappearing, one ship at a time." "Impossible," Theknal snarled. "We have planetary sensors, void scanners, quantum detection grids. Nothing can approach our fleet undetected." "You're thinking like prey," Reed said, and now his smile reached his eyes. "You've been hunting defenseless civilians and barely armed colonies for so long. You've forgotten what it's like to be hunted." He stood up, and even through the static-filled transmission, his movements showed the fluid grace of a born killer. "I've spent 20 years hunting terrorists in caves, drug lords in jungles, and warlords in deserts. I've taken out targets that had better security than your flying scrap heaps." The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Zexkar stared at the blank screen for a long moment. In his 3 centuries of life, he had conquered more worlds than any Kethmore in history. He had faced down battle fleets, survived assassination attempts, and crushed rebellions across the galaxy. But something about that human's casual confidence disturbed him in a way he couldn't quite identify. "Sir?" Theknal ventured. "Your orders?" "Double all patrols," Zexkar commanded. "I want sensor sweeps every 10 minutes. Deploy the hunter-killer squadrons. If this human is foolish enough to attempt an attack, we'll crush him like the insect he is." But even as he gave the orders, Zexkar couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The human had spoken with the confidence of someone who had already won, not someone facing impossible odds. 3 decks below, in the ship's intelligence center, Senior analyst Chickmore was reviewing the transmission data. Unlike most Kethmore, Chickmore was a scholar warrior, trained to understand enemy psychology and tactics. As he studied the human's words and body language, a cold certainty began to grow in his thorax. The human hadn't been making threats. He had been stating facts. Chickmore's claws clicked rapidly across his analysis console as he pulled up files on human military history. What he found made his ichor run cold. These humans had a warrior caste called Special Forces, individuals trained to operate alone behind enemy lines, to cause maximum damage with minimal resources. Their legend spoke of single humans taking out entire enemy installations, of impossible missions completed against overwhelming odds. And SEALs were supposed to be among the best of these warriors. As Chickmore reached for his communications array to warn the admiral, the first explosion rocked the fleet. The destroyer Venom's Fang, positioned on the outer perimeter, simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. The shockwave was so sudden and violent that it took precious seconds for the other ships to even register what had happened. All ships, battle stations. Zexkar's voice boomed across the fleet communications. Report, what happened to the Venom's Fang? Unknown, sir, came the panicked response from the nearby cruiser Bone Render. The ship just exploded. Our sensors show no incoming projectiles, no enemy contacts, nothing. On the surface of the burning planet below, Marcus Reed lowered his detonator and smiled coldly at the expanding cloud of debris that had once been a Kethmore destroyer. Phase 1 was complete. The charges he had planted during his infiltration were working perfectly. He shouldered his rifle and began moving toward his next target. The aliens thought they were apex predators, but they had never faced a human who had trained his entire adult life for one purpose: killing the enemy by any means necessary. The hunt was just beginning. The Kethmore fleet erupted into chaos as emergency klaxons wailed across every ship. Admiral Zexkar watched the debris field where the Venom's Fang had been, his 4 eyes narrowing to deadly slits. In 300 years of conquest, no enemy had ever successfully struck first against his armada. Deploy all fighter squadrons, he commanded, his voice cutting through the bridge noise like a vibroblade. I want search patterns covering every square meter of this planet's surface. That human dies today. Hundreds of sleek fighter craft poured from the Dreadnought's launch bays, their pilots eager for blood. The Kethmore Razor-class fighters were legendary throughout the galaxy for their speed and lethality. Each pilot had trained for decades, their reflexes enhanced by cybernetic implants that allowed them to react faster than most organic minds could think. Squadron leader Vectar led the first wave, his sensors sweeping the ruined cityscape below. Spread formation, he ordered his pilots. Use thermal imaging, electromagnetic scanning, everything. One human cannot hide from 50 fighters. On the surface, Marcus Reed watched the alien craft streak overhead through his scope. He had taken position in the skeletal remains of a skyscraper, using the twisted metal and concrete as both camouflage and cover. His ghillie suit, designed for Earth environments, had been modified with local materials to blend with the alien architecture. Reed's earpiece crackled with intercepted alien communications. 3 weeks of studying their tech while hiding in the ruins had taught him enough of their language to understand basic commands. The aliens were getting frustrated. They expected to find him cowering in some basement, not hunting them with methodical precision. A fighter swooped low over his position, its pilot scanning intently. Reed remained motionless, controlling his breathing as he had been taught in SEER school. The alien pilot's sensors swept past him 3 times before moving on. To the advanced alien technology, he was just another piece of debris in a bombed-out building. When the fighter was far enough away, Reed moved. He had mapped every viable route through the ruins during his weeks of preparation. The aliens expected him to run, to hide, to act like prey. Instead, he was hunting. His target was a supply depot the aliens had established in the city's former commercial district. Reed had observed their pattern. Every 6 hours, a transport would arrive with ammunition and fuel for the fighter squadrons. The aliens were methodical, predictable. In the special operations community, predictable enemies were dead enemies. Reed reached the depot's perimeter in 40 minutes, moving through underground tunnels and collapsed buildings. The Kethmore had posted guards, but they were watching for frontal attacks, not for someone who could move like a ghost through terrain they considered impassable. The guard towers were impressive by alien standards, 20 meters tall, armored, with overlapping fields of fire. But Reed had spent years in Afghanistan dealing with similar defensive positions. The principles were the same whether the enemy had 2 legs or 6. He waited until the guard rotation, timing he had memorized through days of observation. During the 40-second gap when the old sentries were being relieved, Reed moved. He scaled the tower's blind spot using climbing techniques learned in mountaineering school, his movements silent and fluid. The alien guard never knew what hit him. Reed's combat knife found the soft spot between the creature's chitinous armor plates, and the sentry dropped without a sound. Reed caught the body, lowering it gently to prevent any noise that might alert the others. The hard part was just beginning. Reed needed to reach the main ammunition storage, plant his charges, and escape before anyone discovered the dead guard. He had maybe 10 minutes before the next patrol cycle. Moving through the depot was like navigating a deadly maze. The aliens used motion sensors, thermal imaging, and electromagnetic detection, but Reed had studied their equipment, learned their weaknesses. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability, and Reed adapted. He used the aliens' own supply containers as cover, timing his movements to coincide with the loading machinery that masked his heat signature. When motion sensors threatened to detect him, he moved in sync with the mechanical equipment, his presence lost in the background noise of the depot's operations. The main ammunition storage was a fortress within a fortress. Reed smiled grimly as he approached it. The aliens had built their defenses assuming their enemies would use energy weapons and high-tech assault tactics. They hadn't planned for someone with a bag full of plastique explosives and the knowledge to use them effectively. Reed placed his charges with surgical precision, targeting structural weak points and ammunition storage areas that would create a chain reaction. Each explosive was timed to detonate in sequence, maximizing damage while creating the impression of a coordinated assault by a much larger force. As he prepared to leave, his earpiece exploded with alien chatter. They had found the dead guard. All units, security breach in Sector 7, came the urgent transmission. Human infiltrator confirmed. Lock down all facilities immediately. The depot's blast doors began to close. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson as the facility went into full alert mode. Reed had 30 seconds before the exit sealed completely. He ran, abandoning stealth for speed. His enhanced conditioning kicked in, the result of years of training designed to push human performance beyond normal limits. Behind him, he could hear the heavy footsteps of Kethmore security teams converging on his position. A burst of plasma fire scorched the air inches from his head as he dove through a closing blast door. The metal barrier slammed shut behind him, trapping his pursuers inside the facility. Reed allowed himself a moment to catch his breath, then activated his detonator. The explosion was magnificent. The ammunition depot went up in a fireball that could be seen from orbit. The secondary explosions continuing for minutes as different types of ordnance cooked off in sequence. The shockwave shattered windows for kilometers around and sent a mushroom cloud into the alien-poisoned sky. On the flagship Decimator, Admiral Zexkar watched the destruction with growing unease. The human had not only infiltrated a heavily defended position, but had caused more damage in one attack than entire rebel fleets had managed in pitched battles. "Sir," Commander Theknall reported, her voice tight with concern. "The explosion took out 6 months of ammunition reserves and fuel for the entire fighter wing. Casualty reports are still coming in, but we've lost at least 200 personnel." Zexkar's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. 200 Kethmore warriors dead, a major facility destroyed, and their enemy was still out there, still hunting. "Analysis," he demanded. Senior Analyst Cheekmore stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. "Sir, the human's tactics are unlike anything in our databases. He's using what their military calls asymmetric warfare, attacking our strengths with his mobility and stealth rather than meeting us in direct combat." "Then we adapt," Zexkar snarled. "Deploy atmospheric sensor nets. Use gravimetric scanners. No human can hide from our technology indefinitely." But even as he gave the orders, Zexkar couldn't shake the feeling that he was fighting something he didn't understand. The human wasn't just skilled, he was operating on a completely different level of warfare than anything the Kethmore had encountered. On the surface, Marcus Reed was already moving toward his next target. The fighter squadron base was 2 kilometers away, and he had identified 3 different infiltration routes. The aliens would expect him to go to ground after his latest attack, to hide and recover. They were thinking like predators who had grown fat and lazy from hunting weak prey. They had forgotten the most important rule of warfare: never underestimate your enemy. Reed checked his remaining explosives and weapons. He had enough for at least 3 more major strikes before he would need to resupply, and he had already identified several weapons caches the aliens hadn't found yet. The night was young, and the hunt was far from over. Admiral Zexkar had not slept in 36 hours. His compound eyes were bloodshot from staring at tactical displays, watching red warning indicators multiply across his fleet status board. In that short time, the human had destroyed an ammunition depot, sabotaged 3 communication arrays, and somehow infiltrated and eliminated an entire reconnaissance team. The bridge of the Decimator hummed with tense energy as his officers worked frantically to track their invisible enemy. Every few hours brought new reports of damage, casualties, or missing personnel. The human seemed to strike from everywhere and nowhere, leaving destruction in his wake before vanishing like smoke. "Sir," came the voice of Communications Officer Zareth. "Fighter Squadron Omega reports they've lost contact with Patrol Unit 7. Their last transmission was from Grid Reference 447. Zexkar's claws dug into his command throne's armrest. "That's the 4th patrol we've lost this cycle. How is one human eliminating trained Kethmore warriors?" Senior Analyst Chikamore approached with a datapad, his movements cautious. "Sir, I've been studying the humans' attack patterns. There's something you need to understand about their military philosophy." "Explain." "The Kethmore way of war is based on overwhelming force and technological superiority. We crush our enemies with massive firepower and numerical advantage. But humans developed differently. Their homeworld is incredibly diverse, with hundreds of different environments and thousands of separate cultures. They spent millennia fighting each other before reaching the stars." Zexkar's attention focused entirely on the analyst. "Continue." "Human warriors aren't just trained for combat, sir. They're trained for problem-solving under extreme stress. Their special forces, like this SEAL, are taught to view every challenge as a puzzle to be solved rather than an enemy to be overpowered. They adapt, improvise, overcome." At that moment, Marcus Reed was putting that very philosophy into practice. He crouched in a drainage tunnel beneath the aliens' main fighter base, studying the facility's layout through a periscope he had fashioned from salvaged materials. The base was a fortress of metal and energy shields, but Reed had learned long ago that every fortress had weaknesses. The Kethmore had built their base using their standard defensive doctrine: overlapping fields of fire, redundant sensor systems, and massive protective barriers. It was designed to repel frontal assaults by conventional forces. But Reed wasn't conventional, and he wasn't planning a frontal assault. His target wasn't the fighters themselves. Those were too well protected. Instead, he was after something much more critical: the base's power distribution center. Take out the power and the shields would fall, the weapons would go offline, and the entire base would be vulnerable. Reed had spent the last 8 hours mapping the underground utility systems using techniques learned from urban warfare training. The aliens were excellent engineers, but they thought like aliens. They protected what they valued most: their weapons and their warriors. They didn't consider infrastructure as a primary target because they had never faced an enemy who specialized in infrastructure warfare. The power center was guarded, but lightly. The aliens assumed that any attack would come from above, through the main defensive perimeter. They had never considered that an enemy might approach from below. Through systems they considered too cramped and dangerous for effective military use. Reed slipped through the maintenance tunnels with practiced ease. His compact frame, designed by millions of years of evolution to navigate tight spaces, gave him advantages the larger Kethmore couldn't match. Where the aliens needed powered armor and technological assistance, Reed needed only his training and equipment. The power distribution center was a maze of conduits, transformers, and alien technology. Reed studied the setup carefully, identifying the key nodes that distributed energy throughout the base. His demolitions training kicked in as he calculated the exact placement needed to create a cascading failure that would shut down everything at once. As he worked, his earpiece picked up alien communications. They were searching for him, but their search was focused on surface areas and the main tunnel networks. None of them had considered that their enemy might be crawling through spaces barely large enough for a human to fit. Reed placed his charges with surgical precision, setting them to detonate in a specific sequence that would maximize damage while minimizing the risk of the explosion reaching his position. Each explosive was timed to go off 3 seconds after the previous one, creating a wave of destruction that would travel through the power grid like dominoes falling. But as he prepared to leave, Reed heard something that made his blood run cold. Through his intercepted communications, he learned that the aliens had taken hostages. They had found a group of human civilians hiding in the ruins and were planning to execute them if he didn't surrender. For the first time since the invasion began, Reed felt genuine fear. Not for himself. He had accepted the possibility of death when he first put on the uniform, but for innocent people who were suffering because of his actions. Reed closed his eyes and forced himself to think tactically. Surrendering would save the hostages temporarily, but it would also end the only resistance the Kethmore faced. Without pressure from his attacks, they would consolidate their hold on the planet and eventually kill the hostages anyway. The only way to truly save them was to continue the mission. It was the hardest decision he had ever made, but it was also the only logical one. Reed activated his charges and began moving toward the exit. As the first explosion rocked the facility, emergency lighting bathed everything in red. The base's shields flickered and died as power distribution failed throughout the complex. Above ground, the effect was immediate and devastating. Fighter craft attempting to launch found their launch systems offline. Defensive turrets went silent as their power feeds died. Communication arrays crashed as their control systems lost power. All stations report. Admiral Zexkar's voice boomed across the fleet communications. What is the status of Fighter Base Alpha? Sir, the base is completely offline, came the panicked response. Power grid failure throughout the facility. Backup systems are coming online, but it will take hours to restore full functionality. Commander Theknal turned to Zexkar, her mandibles clicking with agitation. Sir, this human is systematically dismantling our operational capacity. He's not trying to win a battle. He's trying to make us lose the war. Zexkar stared at the tactical display showing Fighter Base Alpha as a dead zone on their sensors. The human strategy was becoming clear. He wasn't trying to defeat the Kethmore fleet in direct combat. He was making their occupation unsustainable. Analysis, Zexkar demanded. Chikamore consulted his datapad, his claws trembling slightly. Sir, the human is employing what their military calls asymmetric attrition warfare. He's targeting our logistical and operational infrastructure rather than our combat assets. Every attack forces us to divert resources to defense and repair, weakening our overall position. Then we change tactics, Zexkar snarled. Forget subtlety. I want orbital bombardment of every structure on this planet. Turn the entire surface into molten glass. Sir, Chikamore said carefully, our intelligence suggests that approach might be exactly what the human wants. Zexkar's eyes fixed on the analyst with deadly intensity. Explain. Human military doctrine includes something called force multiplication through enemy overreaction. If we orbital bombard the planet, we destroy any resources we might have gained from conquest. We also demonstrate to other human worlds that we offer no mercy, which will stiffen resistance everywhere else. The human may be willing to die if his death costs us the entire campaign. On the surface, Marcus Reed was already moving toward his next target. The communication relay station was 3 kilometers away, and he had identified the perfect approach route. The aliens would expect him to go to ground after hitting the fighter base. They were wrong. Reed keyed his radio to an emergency frequency and began broadcasting. Any human survivors, this is SEAL Team 7. I am continuing offensive operations against hostile forces. If you can hear this, stay hidden, stay quiet, and stay alive. Help is coming. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. There was no help coming. There was only one man with a rifle and a mission to make the aliens pay for every meter of human soil they had taken. As Reed moved through the ruins toward his next target, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The aliens were beginning to understand what they were really fighting. Not just a human warrior, but thousands of years of human military evolution distilled into one person. They had started this war thinking humans were just another weak species to be conquered. They were learning, one explosion at a time, that some prey fought back. The emergency war council aboard the Decimator was unlike anything in Kethmore military history. For the first time in 3 centuries of conquest, Admiral Zexikar had summoned not just his command staff, but specialists from across the fleet, psychologists, xenobiologists, tactical analysts, and even a few captured enemy commanders from previous campaigns. "Gentlemen," Zexikar began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "in 72 hours, one human has inflicted more damage on our forces than entire rebel fleets. We need new thinking." The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of their losses: 17 facilities destroyed, 43 personnel dead, and hundreds more wounded. Red markers indicated sabotage points, creating a web of destruction across the planetary surface. Dr. Yithnal, the fleet's chief xenopsychologist, stepped forward. Her species, the Veltar, had been conquered by the Kethmore 50 years ago, but their intellectual capabilities had earned them positions as advisors. "Admiral, I have been studying human psychological profiles from our previous encounters. What you face is not simply a skilled warrior. Explain. Humans bond with their military units in ways we don't fully understand. When his team was killed, this individual didn't just lose comrades. He experienced what humans call survivor's guilt, combined with an overwhelming need for revenge. But more than that, he's been trained to view impossible odds not as barriers but as challenges to overcome." Commander Theknal shifted impatiently. "Psychology is meaningless. He's one individual against 10,000. We simply need better tactics." "Respectfully, Commander," Dr. Yithnal continued, "human history suggests otherwise. Their special forces have repeatedly achieved victory against overwhelming odds through what they call force multiplication. One properly trained human can have the strategic impact of an entire battalion." At that moment, the subject of their discussion was proving that point. Marcus Reed lay motionless in the rubble of a collapsed apartment building, watching a Kethmore patrol through his rifle scope. The aliens had adapted their search patterns after his latest attacks, but adaptation took time. And time was something Reed intended to deny them. The patrol consisted of 8 warriors in full combat armor, using advanced scanning equipment to sweep every building systematically. Their formation was textbook perfect: overlapping fields of fire, constant communication, proper spacing to minimize casualties from explosives. Reed smiled grimly. Perfect formations worked against conventional enemies, but Reed wasn't conventional. He had spent the last 6 hours preparing this ambush, using techniques learned from studying insurgent tactics in Iraq and Afghanistan. The key wasn't to fight the enemy's strength. It was to create situations where their strengths became weaknesses. The patrol was following a predictable route, just as Reed had anticipated. Military training emphasized thorough, methodical searches, which meant they would check every building in sequence. Reed had prepared surprises in 3 of those buildings. The first explosion came from 2 blocks away, a remote detonated charge in an abandoned warehouse. The patrol immediately moved toward the sound, their training demanding they investigate potential threats. As they approached the warehouse, Reed triggered the second charge in a building behind them, creating the impression of movement in multiple directions. The patrol leader, a veteran with cybernetic implants, ordered his team to split up to investigate both locations. Reed had counted on that decision. Divided forces were vulnerable forces. He selected his first target carefully, the alien bringing up the rear of the group moving toward the warehouse. Reed's rifle was a hybrid weapon he had assembled from salvaged parts, using both human and alien technology. The suppressed shot dropped the target silently, and Reed was moving before the body hit the ground. The patrol discovered their dead comrade within minutes, but by then Reed was already in position for his next attack. The alien's advanced armor was designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles, but Reed had learned its weaknesses during his weeks of observation. The joints were vulnerable, and the helmet seals could be compromised by precise shots. Over the next 20 minutes, Reed systematically eliminated the entire patrol using classic sniper tactics: shoot and move, never engage from the same position twice, always have multiple escape routes planned. Each shot was carefully calculated for maximum psychological impact as well as physical damage. When the last alien fell, Reed collected their communications equipment and weapons. He had learned to operate Kethmore technology through trial and error, and each piece of captured equipment made him more dangerous. Back on the Decimator, the loss of another patrol sent shockwaves through the command structure. Admiral Zexkar stared at the tactical display showing 8 more red indicators where his warriors had died. "He's not just killing them," Senior Analyst Kickmore reported, his voice trembling. "He's studying them. Each attack shows increased knowledge of our equipment, our tactics, our psychology. He's learning faster than we can adapt." Commander Theknal slammed her fist on the console. "Then we stop playing his game." "I want hunter-killer teams. Orbital surveillance, atmospheric sensors monitoring every square meter of the surface. We find him and we end this." "Ma'am," Cheekmore said carefully, "our intelligence suggests that aggressive response is exactly what he wants." "What do you mean?" "Human special forces are trained for what they call deep reconnaissance and direct action. The more resources we commit to hunting him, the more opportunities he has to strike at targets, while our attention is focused elsewhere. We're being manipulated into fighting his kind of war instead of our own." Dr. Yethnal nodded in agreement. "Admiral, there's something else you need to understand about human psychology. This individual isn't fighting to win in any conventional sense. He's fighting to make our victory so costly that we abandon this world entirely." The truth of those words became clear when the next report arrived. While 3 hunter-killer teams had been searching for Reed in the ruins, he had somehow reached and sabotaged the fleet's main communication relay satellite. Half the armada was now operating with reduced communication capabilities. "How?" Zexkar demanded. "How did he reach orbital infrastructure?" The answer came from the maintenance chief, who had been reviewing security footage. "Sir, he used one of our own cargo shuttles. During the patrol sweep, he infiltrated our landing bay, disabled the security team, and flew a maintenance craft to the relay station. By the time we realized what had happened, he was already back on the surface." The bridge fell silent. The implications were staggering. Not only had the human learned to operate their technology, but he had penetrated their supposedly secure facilities with such ease that no one had noticed until it was too late. Zexkar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Not fear of death. Kethmore warriors were bred for battle. This was something far worse, fear of the unknown. Every assumption about human capabilities was proving wrong. "Dr. Yithnal," he said quietly, "in your studies of human psychology, what drives them to continue fighting when victory is impossible?" The xenopsychologist consulted her datapad. "Admiral, humans have a concept they call mission before self. Their elite warriors are conditioned to view mission completion as more important than personal survival. This individual isn't trying to survive. He's trying to accomplish his objective, even if it kills him." "And what is his objective?" "To make our conquest of this world so expensive in resources and personnel that we choose to withdraw rather than continue the occupation." Zexkar's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. The human wasn't trying to win a battle. He was trying to win a war by making the battle too costly to continue. On the surface, Marcus Reed was already planning his next move. The aliens would increase security after the satellite attack, but increased security meant diverted resources. Every warrior assigned to base defense was one less warrior available for offensive operations. Reed checked his remaining ammunition and explosives. He was running low, but he had identified several weapons caches the aliens hadn't discovered yet. More importantly, he had learned enough about their technology to start turning their own weapons against them. The night was approaching, and with darkness came new opportunities. The aliens relied heavily on their sensors and technology, but Reed had been trained to operate in environments where technology failed. In the dark, with his enhanced night vision equipment and superior knowledge of the terrain, the advantage shifted to him. Reed keyed his radio to the emergency frequency and began broadcasting again. "Any surviving humans, this is SEAL Team 7. Hostile forces are showing signs of stress and tactical confusion. Continue to evade and survive. The enemy is not as invincible as they want you to believe." As he moved through the ruins toward his next target, Reed allowed himself a moment of tactical assessment. The aliens were adapting, but they were adapting slowly and predictably. They were thinking like an occupying force trying to maintain control, not like hunters trying to eliminate a single target. That was their weakness, and Reed intended to exploit it until either he was dead or they decided this planet wasn't worth the cost of keeping it. The war was far from over. Admiral Zexkar stood before the massive holographic display showing the entire planet's surface. Red zones marked areas where the human had struck. Amber zones indicated damaged infrastructure, and green zones showed secure Kethmore positions. The green was shrinking daily. "Enough," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of conquest. "We end this now. Operation Final Hunt begins immediately." The assembled officers watched as Zexkar began issuing orders with military precision. "I want every available warrior on the surface. Deploy all hunter-killer teams, all reconnaissance drones, all orbital surveillance platforms. Seal every tunnel, every building, every possible hiding place. We will flush this human out and finish him." Commander Theknal leaned forward. "Sir, that will require pulling troops from perimeter defense and facility security." "Acceptable losses," Zexkar replied coldly. "One human has cost us more resources than the entire conquest of 3 previous worlds. We commit everything necessary to eliminate him." Dr. Yithnal spoke hesitantly. "Admiral, our psychological profiles suggest this may be exactly what the human wants. Maximum resource commitment creates maximum vulnerability to—" "Silence," Zexkar cut her off. "I will not be lectured about warfare by a conquered species. We are Kethmore. We have crushed civilizations across the galaxy. One human will not dictate our tactics." Within hours, the planet's surface crawled with Kethmore forces. 3,000 warriors in full combat armor, supported by atmospheric fighters, ground assault vehicles, and orbital bombardment platforms. It was the largest military operation in Kethmore history, against a single individual. Marcus Reed watched the deployment from his position in an abandoned subway station, 10 meters underground. His improvised command center was equipped with captured alien sensors and communication equipment, allowing him to monitor their movements in real time. 3,000 troops, he murmured to himself, checking his remaining equipment. They're really pulling out all the stops. Reed had anticipated this moment. Every guerrilla warfare manual emphasized the same principle. Eventually, the enemy would commit everything to eliminate the resistance. When that happened, the guerrilla fighter had 2 choices: run or make their commitment so costly that it broke their will to continue. Reed had no intention of running. His preparations had taken weeks. Throughout the ruined city, he had placed caches of explosives, weapons, and equipment. More importantly, he had prepared what military strategists called kill zones, areas where attacking forces would be channeled into devastating ambushes. The subway system was perfect for his purposes. The aliens knew it existed, but their larger frames made movement through the tunnels difficult. They would expect him to use the tunnels for escape routes. They wouldn't expect him to use them as a trap. Reed activated his communications array and began broadcasting on multiple frequencies. "All Kethmore forces, this is Master Chief Marcus Reed. You want me? Come and get me. I'll be waiting in Central Station, grid reference 225. Come alone if you're brave enough, or bring your whole army if you're scared." The response was immediate. Every alien unit began converging on Central Station, the massive transportation hub in the heart of the city. Reed watched their movement on his screens, counting units, timing their approach, calculating their tactical deployment. Admiral Zexkar took personal command of the assault from an orbital command platform. "All units maintain formation. Seal all exits. I want overlapping fields of fire covering every possible escape route. This ends today." The first wave of Kethmore troops reached Central Station 20 minutes later. They found Marcus Reed exactly where he said he would be, standing alone on the main platform, rifle in hand, wearing his full combat gear. "Human," called the assault team leader through his suit's external speakers. "You are surrounded by 3,000 warriors. Surrender now and your death will be quick." Reed's response was to fire a single shot that dropped the team leader where he stood. Then he disappeared into the shadows of the station as the Kethmore opened fire with everything they had. What followed was unlike anything in Kethmore military experience. Reed had spent weeks turning Central Station into a maze of death traps, concealed positions, and kill zones. Every entrance had been rigged with explosives. Every corridor contained hidden firing positions. Every apparent escape route led to another ambush. The aliens advanced methodically, using their superior firepower and numbers to clear each area. But Reed wasn't trying to hold ground. He was trying to make them pay for every meter they gained. He moved through the station like a ghost, using maintenance tunnels, ventilation shafts, and hidden passages to strike from unexpected angles. His attacks were surgical. 1 or 2 shots, then immediate relocation before return fire could find him. Section Alpha, report, came the radio chatter. Heavy resistance, sir. We've lost 6 warriors in the last 10 minutes. The human is using the infrastructure against us. Section Beta, advance on the eastern platform. Sir, the eastern platform is mined. Massive explosions, multiple casualties. Admiral Zexkar watched the battle through drone feeds, his confidence slowly turning to horror. His warriors were dying in dozens, caught in traps and ambushes that seemed to anticipate their every move. The human wasn't just fighting, he was conducting a symphony of destruction. How is this possible? Commander Theknal demanded. We have them outnumbered 3,000 to 1. Senior Analyst Cheekmore studied the tactical displays with growing understanding. Sir, the human is using classic urban warfare tactics adapted for our technology and psychology. He's fighting a defensive battle in prepared positions while maintaining offensive initiative through mobility and superior knowledge of the terrain. In the depths of Central Station, Reed was putting years of urban combat training to deadly use. Room clearing, building searches, tunnel warfare. Every skill he had learned in the streets of Baghdad and the mountains of Afghanistan was being applied against an alien enemy. The Kethmor were excellent warriors, but they had never faced an enemy who specialized in close-quarters combat in urban environments. Their tactics were designed for open-field battles and siege warfare, not for hunting a single opponent through a maze of debris and destruction. Reed used their size against them, forcing them into tight spaces where their superior firepower was neutralized. He used their numbers against them, creating situations where they were more likely to hit each other than him in the confined spaces. Most importantly, he used their psychology against them, exploiting their growing fear and frustration. All units concentrate fire on Grid Section 7, ordered the ground commander. Reed smiled as he listened to their communications. They were getting desperate, abandoning tactical precision for overwhelming firepower. That was exactly what he wanted. The concentrated bombardment brought down half of Grid Section 7, but Reed wasn't there. He had anticipated their response and moved to a position where he could observe the destruction. As the dust settled and the aliens moved in to confirm the kill, Reed triggered his largest surprise. The entire eastern wing of Central Station collapsed in a carefully orchestrated demolition. Hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete and steel crashed down on the advancing Kethmor forces, trapping dozens and creating a massive cloud of debris that blinded their sensors. In the chaos that followed, Reed emerged from concealment and began systematically eliminating the confused and disoriented survivors. His movements were precise, economical, deadly. Each shot was carefully aimed, each position carefully chosen for maximum effect and minimum exposure. Fall back, came the panicked order. All units fall back to perimeter positions. But Reed wasn't finished. As the aliens retreated, he pursued them through the tunnels, picking off stragglers and wounded warriors with methodical precision. He had turned the hunters into the hunted, the predators into prey. Admiral Zexkar watched his forces stream out of Central Station in disorder, leaving behind more than 200 dead and wounded. The greatest military operation in Kethmor history had been defeated by one human with a rifle and superior knowledge of warfare. Sir, reported the ground commander, his voice shaken, we need to regroup. The human has turned the entire area into a killing field. Our forces are taking casualties faster than we can advance. Zexkar stared at the tactical display showing the scattered positions of his retreating forces. For the first time in his long military career, he had been outfought by an enemy who should have been impossible to defeat. In the ruins of Central Station, Marcus Reed reloaded his rifle and checked his equipment. The major assault had cost him most of his prepared positions and ammunition, but it had also cost the aliens something far more valuable: their confidence. Reed activated his radio for another broadcast. Kethmor Command, this is Master Chief Reed. Your 3,000 warriors just got their asses kicked by one human. Still think you're the apex predators of this galaxy? The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. The aliens were beginning to understand what they were really fighting, and it terrified them. The war had reached its turning point. The emergency session aboard the Decimator was conducted in complete silence, except for the steady hum of life support systems. Admiral Zexkar sat motionless in his command throne, staring at casualty reports that defied comprehension. In 6 days, one human had inflicted losses that exceeded entire military campaigns. The holographic display showed the stark reality. 347 Kethmore warriors dead, 623 wounded, massive infrastructure damage, and fleet morale at critical levels. Combat units were requesting transfers to other sectors. Some were openly questioning the wisdom of continuing the occupation. "Admiral," Commander Theknal said carefully, "we have lost more personnel in this one system than in the conquest of the entire Veltar Empire. The troops are unsettled." Zexkar's compound eyes focused on his second-in-command with predatory intensity. "Unsettled?" "Sir, there are reports of warriors refusing patrol assignments. Some are claiming the human possesses supernatural abilities. Others are saying we should abandon this world and mark it as hostile to Kethmore interests." The silence that followed was deafening. In 3 centuries of conquest, Kethmore forces had never been broken by enemy action. They had faced overwhelming odds, superior technology, and fanatical resistance. But they had never faced anything like Marcus Reed. Dr. Yithanal stepped forward hesitantly. "Admiral, I believe I understand what we're facing. In human mythology, there are stories of individuals who achieved legendary status through impossible feats of combat. They call them one-man armies or force multipliers. This individual appears to be a real-world manifestation of those legends." "Mythology is irrelevant," Zexkar snarled.
"He is one being with finite ammunition and limited endurance."
He was interrupted by an urgent communication from the surface. "Admiral, this is ground control. We're receiving another transmission from the human." The main screen flickered to life, showing Marcus Reed's dirt-streaked face. Behind him, the ruins of Central Station burned in the distance. His eyes held the same fearless confidence they had shown from the beginning. But now there was something else. Exhaustion that came from pushing human endurance beyond its limits. "Admiral Zexkar," Reed said, his voice steady despite obvious fatigue. "By now you've counted your losses. 347 dead, more than 600 wounded. Your troops are scared, your commanders are questioning orders, and your whole invasion is falling apart because of one man with a rifle." Zexkar leaned forward, his hatred burning in every word. "Human, your luck will run out. You cannot fight forever." Reed smiled, and the expression was genuinely amused rather than threatening. "You're right about one thing, I can't fight forever. But I don't have to. You want to know the beautiful thing about what I've accomplished here? Enlighten me. Every human world in this sector is watching. Every resistance movement, every planetary defense force, every military commander is studying what one seal did to the mighty Kethmore Empire. I've given them something they never had before. Proof that you can be beaten." The implications hit Zexkar like a physical blow. Human worlds throughout the sector would have received broadcasts of the battle, sensor readings of the Kethmore losses, tactical analyses of Reed's methods. The psychological impact would spread far beyond this single planet. "You've turned me into something more dangerous than just a warrior," Reed continued. "You've turned me into a symbol. Every human who fights you from now on will remember that one man brought down 300 of your best troops. They'll know that if one person can do that much damage, imagine what an entire resistance movement can accomplish." Commander Theknal turned to Zexkar with growing alarm. "Sir, if other human worlds adopt similar tactics," the realization was staggering. The Kethmore Empire had conquered through overwhelming force applied rapidly and decisively. But human resistance fighters using Reed's methods could turn every occupation into a grinding war of attrition that would drain resources and personnel faster than they could be replaced. "There's something else you should know," Reed added, his tone becoming almost conversational. "I'm not the only one. There are thousands of operators like me scattered throughout human space. Delta Force, Rangers, Marine Reconnaissance, SS, Spetsnaz, commando units from dozens of worlds. You've been fighting civilian populations and barely trained militias. You haven't seen what human military professionals can really do." Zexkar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed this information. The human was right. The Kethmore had deliberately targeted lightly defended worlds to build momentum for their campaign. They had avoided major human military installations and professional armed forces. "But here's the thing that should really worry you," Reed continued. his smile becoming predatory. I'm tired. I'm running low on ammunition. My equipment is breaking down. By all rights, you should be able to overwhelm me now through sheer persistence. Then surrender, Zexkar growled. Can't do that. But I can make you an offer. Reed leaned closer to the camera. I challenge you to single combat. Admiral against warrior. You beat me, and I'll broadcast a message telling every human in this sector to surrender. I beat you, and your fleet leaves this system and never comes back. The bridge erupted in shocked chatter. Single combat was an ancient Kethmore tradition, but it hadn't been practiced in centuries. The suggestion that their supreme commander would face a member of a conquered species in personal battle was almost unthinkable. Impossible, Commander Theknal declared. The Admiral cannot risk himself against— Why not? Reed interrupted, somehow able to hear their conversation through the communication link. Afraid your big bad Admiral can't handle one exhausted human? Or maybe you're worried that if I kill him, the whole galaxy will know that human warriors are superior to Kethmore warriors. The challenge struck at the core of Kethmore psychology. They were a warrior culture that valued personal courage above all else. To refuse single combat when challenged would be seen as cowardice by every member of the species. Zexkar stood slowly, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of acceptance. Very well, human. Single combat. But not here. You will come to me, to the surface platform of my flagship. No weapons, no armor, no technological assistance. Warrior to warrior. Agreed, Reed replied immediately. But I have one condition. The combat is broadcast live to every human world in this sector. Let them see how this ends. Acceptable. 1 hour. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Dr. Yithnal was the first to speak. Admiral, this is exactly what the human wants. Win or lose, he achieves his objective. If he dies, he becomes a martyr. If he wins, he will not live to enjoy his victory, Zexkar said coldly. Alert the medical bay to prepare combat stimulants and healing accelerators. I want maximum performance enhancement. Sir, Senior Analyst Chickmore said quietly. There's something else to consider. Human records indicate their special forces undergo psychological conditioning to remove fear of death. This individual may be prepared to sacrifice himself to ensure you die with him. Zexkar's response was to begin removing his ceremonial armor, revealing the scarred chitin beneath. Then he will learn what it means to face a Kethmore warlord in battle. On the surface, Marcus Reed was making his own preparations. His body was running on stimulants and determination, pushed far beyond normal human limits. Every muscle ached. Every movement sent waves of exhaustion through his system. But his mind remained sharp, focused on the mission. He checked his remaining equipment one final time. Hidden in his combat uniform were small explosive charges set to detonate if his vitals flatlined. If the alien managed to kill him, they would die together. The psychological impact of their admiral's death would shatter Kethmore morale throughout the sector. Reed activated his emergency beacon and began broadcasting to every human frequency he could reach. This is Master Chief Marcus Reed to all human forces. In 1 hour, I face the Kethmore Admiral in single combat. Whatever happens, remember this, they can be beaten. One human showed that 300 aliens could be brought down by superior tactics and determination. Use that knowledge. Make them pay for every world they take. As he prepared for what would likely be his final battle, Reed allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Win or lose, he had accomplished something unprecedented in Kethmore history. He had shown an entire galaxy that the supposed apex predators could be brought low by one determined human with the right training and the will to never give up. The final confrontation was about to begin. The landing platform aboard the Decimator had been hastily converted into an arena. Thousands of Kethmore warriors lined the observation decks, their compound eyes fixed on the circle of bare metal where their admiral would face the human who had become legend in just 1 week. Admiral Zexkar stood at one end of the platform, his massive frame enhanced by combat stimulants that made his chitin gleam like polished obsidian. At nearly 3 meters tall and weighing over 400 kilograms, he was a perfect example of Kethmore evolution, built for killing, hardened by centuries of warfare, augmented by the finest military technology their species had developed. At the opposite end stood Marcus Reed. He looked impossibly small by comparison, just under 2 meters tall and 75 kilograms of exhausted human muscle and bone. His combat uniform was torn and stained with alien blood. His face bore the marks of a week of constant warfare, cuts, bruises, and the hollow-eyed look of someone who had pushed far, beyond normal human endurance. But his eyes still held that same fearless confidence that had unsettled the Kethmore from the beginning. Throughout human space, billions watched the live broadcast. On military bases, resistance cells, civilian shelters, and orbital stations, humans gathered around screens to witness what many believed would be the death of the man who had shown them that their enemies could bleed. Dr. Yithnal stood at Admiral Zexkar's side, her role as referee for this ancient ritual. "The terms are agreed," she announced, her voice carrying across the platform into every receiver in the system. "Single combat, no weapons, no armor, no outside assistance. Combat continues until one participant yields or dies." Zexkar's mandibles clicked with anticipation. "Human, you have fought well for your species. I offer you one final chance to yield with honor." Reed's response was to strip off his combat harness and throw it aside. Underneath, his body showed the toll of constant fighting. Fresh scars, fading bruises, muscles that trembled slightly from exhaustion and chemical enhancement. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I didn't come here to yield, Admiral. I came here to finish what you started." The circle erupted as both warriors charged. Zexkar's attack was a symphony of lethal precision. 4 arms struck simultaneously, each blow powered by enhanced musculature and targeting vital points with surgical accuracy. His reach advantage was enormous, his speed enhanced by decades of combat implants, his technique refined by 3 centuries of personal warfare. Reed should have died in the first exchange. Instead, he flowed around the aliens' attacks like water, using techniques learned from close-quarters combat instructors who had studied every form of hand-to-hand fighting known to humanity. Where Zexkar relied on brute force and superior physicality, Reed used leverage, timing, and the alien's own momentum against him. The first surprise came when Reed managed to grapple one of Zexkar's arms and use it to lever the massive alien off balance. The second surprise came when Reed's counterattack targeted nerve clusters in Kethmore anatomy that shouldn't have been known to any human. "Impossible," Commander Technal breathed from the observation deck. "How does he know our physiological weaknesses?" The answer was simple. Marcus Reed had spent 6 days studying dead Kethmore bodies, learning their anatomy, identifying pressure points and vulnerable areas. Every enemy he had killed had taught him something new about how to kill more efficiently. Zexkar roared with pain and fury as Reed's strike partially paralyzed his lower left arm. The human was impossibly fast, impossibly skilled, using fighting techniques that seemed to adapt to Kethmore physiology in real time. But Reed was also human, and humans had limits. Zexkar's superior size and strength began to tell as the combat continued. A devastating blow to Reed's ribs sent him staggering, blood spraying from his mouth. A follow-up strike nearly separated his shoulder. Reed fell to one knee, gasping for breath, his body finally beginning to fail under the accumulation of damage and exhaustion. Zexkar loomed over him, all 4 arms raised for the killing blow. "You fought well, human," the Admiral said with genuine respect, "but you are still just prey." Reed looked up at his executioner and smiled through bloody teeth. "No, Admiral, I'm something much worse than prey." His hand moved to a hidden device on his belt. "I'm the proof that you're not invincible." The explosion that followed vaporized the entire landing platform and sent shockwaves through the massive dreadnought. Reed's hidden charges, enhanced with captured alien explosives, turned both warriors into atoms of superheated plasma in a fraction of a second. But the real explosion was the one that rippled across human space as billions watched their greatest enemy die alongside the man who had become their greatest hero. On military bases throughout the sector, recruitment officers were overwhelmed by volunteers. On occupied worlds, resistance movements that had been hiding in cellars and forests suddenly emerged with new tactics and unshakable confidence. On the frontier, human fleets that had been retreating in the face of Kethmore aggression suddenly turned and began hunting their hunters. Commander Technal found herself in command of a leaderless fleet, surrounded by human worlds that were no longer afraid, with warriors who had lost their will to fight. The psychological impact of watching their invincible admiral die at the hands of a single human had shattered Kethmore morale more effectively than any military defeat. Dr. Yithnal, observing from the medical bay where she had been monitoring the combat, began drafting her final report on human psychology. Her conclusions would reshape xenobiological understanding throughout the galaxy. Subject: Analysis of human combat psychology and strategic impact. The individual designated Marcus Reed has achieved something unprecedented in recorded galactic history. Through superior tactical knowledge, adaptive problem-solving, and absolute psychological commitment to mission accomplishment, one human warrior inflicted strategic defeat upon a force more than 10,000 times his size. The implications for future military planning are staggering. Human warriors appear to operate on psychological principles completely different from known galactic norms. Where other species fight for survival, territory, or resources, humans appear capable of fighting for abstract concepts such as honor, duty, and revenge with an intensity that borders on the supernatural. Recommendation: all future military operations against human populations should assume worst-case scenarios regarding individual human combat effectiveness. Standard force multiplication calculations do not apply when facing human special warfare personnel. 3 months later, the Kethmore Empire officially withdrew from human space, citing unacceptable casualties for minimal, strategic gain. The withdrawal marked the first time in their history that the Kethmore had abandoned a conquest due to enemy action. The story of Master Chief Marcus Reed became legend throughout human space and beyond. Military academies studied his tactics, resistance movements adopted his methods, and children learned his name alongside the greatest heroes in human history. But perhaps the most important legacy was the change in how the galaxy viewed humanity. No longer were they seen as just another species to be conquered or ignored. They were recognized as something far more dangerous. A species that produced individuals capable of achieving impossible victories through sheer determination and superior training. The galactic balance of power had shifted, and it all began with one Navy SEAL who refused to surrender when facing impossible odds. In the ruins of the planet where it all started, human colonists erected a simple monument in the place where Central Station had once stood. The inscription was brief: Master Chief Marcus Reed, United States Navy SEALs. He showed the galaxy what one human can accomplish when failure is not an option. The monument became a pilgrimage site for human warriors throughout the galaxy. Each visitor left with the same understanding that had terrified the Kethmore Empire. When humanity decided to fight, they didn't just fight to win. They fought to prove that some things were worth dying for, and that proof was worth more than any victory. The legend of Marcus Reed lived on, inspiring a generation of humans who would ensure that no alien empire would ever again underestimate the species that had turned one man into a force that changed the galaxy. The war was over. Humanity had won, and the universe would never be the same.